So welcome back. So in this section we are going to address one very important aspect of classical mechanics before going into so-called measurement theory. So this part of the topic which deals with Lagrangian and principle of least action probably you have already studied. If not, then I refer these two books, one by Goldstein. Just a minute, let me use the pen. Classical Mechanics by Goldstein or by Rana and Jog. These two books are very good. So you can read the chapter of principle of least action. So let me write it. Sorry, this pen size is problem. Yeah. Principle of least action. So what is this principle of least action? I'll explain a little later. So first, before going into that, let's consider the classical description of a particle dynamics. So in middle school you have learned about Newton's law, right? That the acceleration is proportional to the force, and acceleration is basically rate of change of velocity, and action has opposite reaction, all that. But those laws actually are governed by a fundamental principle. That principle is called principle of least action, and that tells you that if you move from point 1 to point 2 in time, and if your description is classical, then there is only one path that is allowed, and this path will follow a principle of least action. To understand what is action, we first need to understand what is Lagrangian. So Lagrangian is basically is kinetic energy minus the potential energy, because the T is basically kinetic energy and V is the potential energy. Remember, the Hamiltonian description is basically the total energy. The Lagrangian gives you does not give you the total energy. It gives you the basically the kinetic energy minus the potential energy. And in this description, if you have the Lagrangian, you can calculate something that is called action. So let me go to the whiteboard, because this is very important and you don't have a classical mechanics lecture, so I think you have to self read it. I try to explain a bit whatever I can in this small time. So as I said that, let me use a different color code here, so maybe something else. Yeah, so let me use this one. So Lagrangian is basically kinetic energy minus the potential energy, which is represented by T minus V. And let's say you have a particle with a velocity of x dot, so this is velocity, and mass of m, then the kinetic energy is half mv square, which is half m x dot square, and the potential energy is a function of coordinate, you call this vx. Now the action is a function, basically is the integration of L dt from point t1 to t2. So there is a time point t1 and there is a time point t2, and there are many paths that are allowed. Actually there are infinitely many paths that are allowed. Now if you roll a ball on the floor, due to the gravity and the friction, this ball will be guided by some path. If it is completely frictionless, it will go through a straight line. If there is friction, it will change its path, but it cannot go in very different paths. It will follow one single curve. And if there is no other force or no other friction, then it will follow the force that you imparted on that one, that is, it will follow a straight line in normal circumstances. So that means a classical particle is always choosing one path, and this force or whatever frictional force is basically given by this potential. So you see there are many paths, but this yellow line is basically the actual path that is followed. Now how do we know it, that it will follow the green path, or sorry, the yellow path? Now this is governed by a principle which is called principle of least action. So if you take the variation of this action delta s, which is basically delta of integration L dt, and which is integration of dl dt. And if you demand that this variation is 0, then you can very easily show. So this is an exercise, you can actually practice it. This is, I think you will do it, this exercise. So if you take that action, that Lagrangian, which is half mx dot square minus vx, if you put this back, so you get a form like this. And then this delta s, sorry, this should be delta s, just a moment. So this delta s0 will give you an expression which is mx double dot is equals to minus dv of dx. If you remember, this is the rate of change of potential energy and negative. So basically this is F, nothing by the force, and this, you remember, this is basically what? It is mass times acceleration. So this is mass, this is acceleration, and this is nothing but Newton's law. So Newton's law is what? Newton's law gives description how a particle roll if you exert a force F, and this is the acceleration is proportional to the force, and this is what it actually says. So what we realize is that Newton's law is nothing special. It is just the law that comes from the principle of least action. Now this is a very, I don't know, many of you probably already know this, that all the law in classical physics, all the laws, even the light propagation and everything, follows principle of least action. And this equation that you call Newton's equation, it has a generic name. Its name is called Euler-Lagrange equation. So I'll go back to the PDF. So please read this Euler-Lagrange equation. So here I wrote in terms of the Lagrangian. Just a moment, I have to use the pen. Yeah. Oops. So this is your Lagrangian, and the kinetic energy is written in a different form, p square over twice m. This is one dimensional, so I wrote px and minus vx. Now these variable x and p dot, so let me just write x and p dot or px. So basically x and m x dot. Okay, this m and mx dot are giving you this Lagrangian. Now there was one thing that is very important, why you need these two variables, because if you take x, you can calculate x dot, and m is the mass, so you can calculate mx dot. Why you need two variables? Now to get that answer, if you go back to the previous equation of Newton's law, if you go to high school, you see this is a second order differential equation, and to solve a second order differential equation you need two boundary conditions, that means two initial conditions. In a matter of fact, you can say that is basically, you can think of these equations, or which is Euler-Lagrange equations, are basically it has two variables, one is x, another is px, or one is x, another is mx dot. And these two variables are called canonically conjugate variable, because if you have these two variables and their initial values, then you know the particle propagation. And that equation that I showed you, the Newton's equation, if you solve this generic, if you apply the principle of least action here, so this Lagrangian, if you apply it here, oops, I don't know, then you get the equation like this. So it's d dt of del L del x dot equal to del L del x. So this is the equation which is known as Euler and Lagrange equation. So this equation is the mother equation of any equation in classical mechanics, and this equation deals with these two variables which are called canonically conjugate variable. So they are basically independent, so you can say canonically conjugate variables. and they can describe the whole system. So if you know the initial value of these two variables, and if you have this equation, you know the description. In classical mechanics, I don't know if you have read it or not. If you not, please pick these two books and read something known as Poisson bracket. This is very important. One of the most important thing. What it says is that the commutator of x and p, so which is pxx minus xpx equals to 0. What it says? It says these two variables x and p, they are basically independent, or they can be measured independently. So now we learn three things. First, a Lagrangian can be described by two variables which are canonically conjugate, and if we know their initial value and the Euler-Lagrange equation, which you can derive from principle of least action, you can describe the system perfectly. But this Poisson bracket, which is equal to 0, tells you that these two variables can be measured independently, and this is a very, very crucial thing. Why? Because when you go to the juncture where you are not sure that you are in the classical regime of the scenario or in the quantum regime of the scenario, you have to understand that these two variables plays an important role, and these two variables are no longer independent. So remember that we talked about the wave particle duality. We talked about de Broglie's hypothesis, where you have H coming in. So these are related. These are related. So as you go smaller and smaller length scale, the measurement of one variable are related to the other variable, and they are no longer independent. So this independent nature is a classical nature. The moment you go to the quantum nature, so then these Poisson bracket will no longer be 0, and this Poisson bracket will be replaced by something called commutator brackets. There would be a quantum mechanics course separately. You can learn there, and classical mechanics you also learn. I recommend this book. Any classical mechanics book you read, and I recommended two books, Goldstein and Ranajo. That is quite very good book. You please read those. So now in this part I'll talk about something called measurement theory. So how do you measure something? Let's say you go to the market, you want to buy 1 kilo potato, you put a weight, and the other in the weight machine you put the potato, and it shows the balance, and you use the gravity, and so mgh equal to mgh, and then you just get the gravitational mass equal to that mass, and you get back, and this is perfectly fine. This is one kind of measurement. Now let's say you have a fever, and you put the thermometer, and you measure the mercury expansion, and that gives in some scale, and you measure your temperature. So you don't, and then you, after measuring the thermometer is in thermometer, the weight machine is in weight machine, so you think that everything is back to normal. But that is not true. That is not simply true, because the moment you try to measure something, you disturb the system. Without disturbing, you cannot measure. So let me explain a bit more. Let's say when you are measuring your temperature by thermometer, and you are saying, okay, you have let's say 98 degree Fahrenheit temperature, because the mercury level actually expanded, and it actually stopped there, and you are saying you have a fever of 98 degree Fahrenheit. But before you put the thermometer in contact of your body, the thermometer was showing some other meters, right? Some other level. So how does the thermometer knows that your body temperature goes to 98? If you think carefully, the mercury actually, and the glass, alongside the mercury, the thermometer surface has taken heat from your body in order to expand. Now that heat that was required for the expansion of the mercury, as well as heating up the thermometer. And again, something is wrong. Okay. So let us go to the double slit experiment again. You can understand a bit. So in the double slit experiment, you remember when I said that this is the quantum picture that you get. This is the quantum picture you get, but if you put an observer here, then you get the classical picture. So the moment you try to observe or measure something, this electron is either going to this hole or that hole. It is no longer in the superposition state. But if you don't observe something, then it would be superposition state. So observation is basically some kind of measurement, and this tells you that when you try to measure something, you are disturbing the system. So in principle, I'll try to explain mathematically. This is what I wrote here. So in principle, the probability of the electron going through slit number 1 or slit number 2 can be expressed in an expression like this. So if you do not put the observer there, the electron is either going through slit 1 or slit 2. Even if you are bombarding with single electron, it is still valid because you see the interference fringes. So you don't know. But the moment you put an observer there, suddenly it collapses either to slit 1, let me put S1, and this is S2. So suddenly you see two different fringes. So the system is disturbed. It is no longer basically in the superposition state. So this is the essence of measurement theory. And let's say you want to observe the sodium light, or you want to observe some laser spectra coming from some compound that you have devised. And so what do? You basically put energy, and then electron is basically going from one level to another level, and when they actually go back to the lower level, they radiate certain energy, and you can see certain frequency as a laser frequency. So in doing that, in observing that, the how much energy level, you are actually disturbing the system by pumping the energy. So without disturbing the system, you cannot observe that. So in principle, I can tell you another very common example. Let's say now it is probably not valid because you are not in hostel, but let's assume by the end of the next semester you come back to hostel. Now your parents are at home, and the parents probably don't know. Let's say it is a lunch break or just after the lunch break, they don't know whether you are in the hostel or in the classroom. So you are in a superposition state with respect to your parents. The moment they call you and they disturb you during the class or during the lunch break, they know where you are. You are no longer superposition state from their perspective. But how do they know that? They have to disturb you by do a phone call or a WhatsApp chat or something. So without disturbing, they cannot get the information. So information is always, or information / measurement means disturbing the system. And this I can write down. Let's say I write down a psi, which is an wave function, which is Ci phi I. So phi I are different possibilities, 1 to n. In principle, let's say it is you. So let's say you are in IIT. So you have your classroom, your lunch break room, your playground, your movie theater, whatever. So there are different probability. You have, if it is Saturday, Sunday, you go for movie or go to shopping mall or whatever. And as an instructor, I have no idea where you are unless I contact you. And the moment I contact you, I somehow disturbed you, and you come back to some state. And for me, you are in that state that time. Without that, I don't know. So this sounds little bit philosophical, but actually it is very mathematical. Everything comes with a probability. Okay. So like what do you do after if you pass out from IIT Hyderabad is also a probabilistic. You can only put some CI, and you have different, some people will do MBA, some people will become scientists, some people will become teacher. That's how it will go. So this is a very I think one of the first very basic principle that leads to Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Now I'll combine both of this. So this measurement theory as well as the canonically conjugate variable. So what are canonically conjugate? X comma p, and again you write it, and now it is no longer 0. It is basically I h cross, where h cross is basically h over twice of pi. So what it says that if you go back to so let's say yeah. So this delta S basically okay, there is, maybe I'll come back to this later. And so delta S going to 0 can be thought of as, just imagine this one, thought of that H cross goes to 0, because when H cross goes to 0, this thing will actually this thing will only contribute, because this will go to 0 and this will also go to 0. But if H cross is not equal to 0, if you don't understand it right now, then maybe I'll devote another class at some point, or you read the classical mechanics bit, but I'm just trying to give some example here. So what I'm trying to say, this when you take the variation of this, let's say I call it I, and if you take the variation of this, so these variations, so this portion is basically variable delta S, so you get some I delta S over H cross, and when this goes to 0, this goes to 0, you pick up one path. But when this does not go to 0, what do you get? You get between the two, there are many paths that are allowed. So all paths are allowed depending on H cross. So when H cross goes to 0, then one of the path will be allowed, because this would be 0 over 0 and one path will be allowed somehow. I mean, I'll not go into the details of this principle of least action and the quantum nature of this, and this is too advanced. But when you do quantum mechanics 2, you'll learn path integral approach of quantum mechanics. That time you'll understand it. But just remember that when you go to H cross not equal to 0, you allow more paths to happen, and that is related to this fact that these commutator brackets are non-zero, and because of these commutator brackets non-zero, you can think of the other canonically conjugate variable like ypx so ypx, and then you have also this te, these are canonically conjugate variable. So the measurement of delta x and delta p should be order of H cross. So you cannot measure both the variable x and p absolutely independently. There is a portion of error, and their error allows that there are more than one path that is allowed, and that is the classical nature, quantum nature. And the classical mechanics, so this is basically the quantum nature, this is quantum mechanics. In classical mechanics, this would be 0, because what we saw in this Poisson bracket, this was 0. So Poisson bracket gives you absolutely 0. So the delta x and delta p are independent, and here delta x and delta p are not independent. So this was proposed by Heisenberg, and this is very, very important, because if you have this kind of law, then you can predict many things which are quantum in nature. So I gave two exercises and I ask you to go through this. So let's say you want to calculate, so I said calculate the radius of hydrogen atom using uncertainty principle, where the binding energy is this. And there is another exercise which is the electron of mass 0.5 MeV, and what is the required energy to achieve the wavelength of nuclear force of, this is basically reverse of what I actually solved. So you have to calculate the wavelength and you have to use the uncertainty principle, which is basically H cross, and then you can explain this. So these two variables, let's say if you measure let's say if you try to measure delta x, so then the uncertainty of delta x would be the uncertainty the H cross over uncertainty over delta p. So they are related, they are no longer actually separate. Anyway, so in the next section of the lecture, I will try to do some exercise on uncertainty principle, and then I will move on to photoelectric effect.